Moving forward, for the second talk on unlocking your hero potential, we have Dr. Hugo Espinosa and Dr. Amanda Biggs from Griffith University, Australia. Let me introduce the speakers. Dr. Hugo Espinosa has been a visiting researcher at the Federal Polytechnic School of Lausanne, Switzerland, and a postdoctoral fellow at the School of Electrical Engineering, Tel Aviv University, Israel. Since 2014, he is with the School of Engineering and Built Environment, Griffith University, Australia, where he is currently a lecturer in electronic engineering. His research interests include computational electromagnetics, antennas and propagation, electromagnetic separation of conducting materials, electromagnetics education, inertial magnetic sensors, wearable sensor technology for human monitoring, and wearable technology in STEM. His research has been published in various IEEE transactions, and he has been involved in several consultancy projects with the defense, the police, mining industries, and sports engineering companies.
Thank you.
Our speaker, Dr. Amanda Biggs, is a lecturer in the Department of Employment Relations and Human Resources at Griffith University, Australia. Amanda has taught undergraduate and postgraduate courses including organizational behavior, leadership and self-development, and research methods. Amanda has published over 80 academic and industry outputs based on her collaborative research with public and private sector organizations. She has contributed to research projects that have assisted organizations to identify factors that contribute to psychological injury claims, detect predictors of bullying, establish managerial accountability frameworks, identify strategies to engage employees working within high-stress environments, and develop and refine training for staff and organizational leaders. Now I hand over the session to the speakers.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ramani, for the introduction, the presentation. Thank you very much, Selvan, for organizing this series of presentations. It's great to be here, and we really appreciate the invitation. I just want to say that I want to thank you as well for the very kind words that you mentioned before during your presentation. We're talking about a networking and collaborations. I agree. And I think we all know how difficult 2020 was for everybody, but I have to say that one of the great things for me has been meeting you, meeting Cindy, and having the opportunity to working with you. So that has been great, and I hope that continues for a very long time. So thank you very much once again. And I think we are ready to present. I'm going to make a little brief introduction. This is our presentation, Unlocking Your Hero Potential. Hopefully by the end of it, you will get an idea of what does psychological capital mean, how can we use it from the psychological perspective, and well, obviously how can we apply it to our courses if we are educator or if we are a student as well. So I want to thank Amanda for being accepting joining this presentation. It's a big pleasure for me to do this together with her, because we started not long ago collaborating in our research. We have there's a lot of potential for this inclusion between engineering and psychology. So we see a lot of potential there, and I think there are many things that can be done. So hopefully you will enjoy this. So I think this is a great collaboration between the two of us in the different expertises that we have.
Thank you very much, Hugo. So this is Amanda now, and as was mentioned in the introduction, I do work in the business school, but I do have a background in psychology. So my research really focuses on strategies that individuals and organizations can adopt that make people happier and healthier at work. So that's where my research focus lies. And today I will be explaining exactly what we mean by unlocking your hero potential. And in case you were wondering, no, our presentation has nothing to do with the Avengers. What we will be talking about, however, is how developing 4 specific personal strengths can promote beneficial outcomes for students that will then translate effectively to the workforce or the workplace. So we're really looking at positive strengths that we can develop through education at university that will then increase students' employability in the workforce as well. So what exactly do we mean by HERO? So HERO is an acronym and it stands for hope, efficacy, resilience, and optimism. So psychological capital is a positive psychological state, so something that's internal to us as human beings, and it's characterized by high levels of those 4 factors: hope, efficacy, resilience, and optimism. I wanted to quickly just provide you with a little information about where PsyCap comes from, what discipline is it grounded in, and also why it's called psychological capital. So just to start off with, PsyCap originated from the subdiscipline of psychology known as positive psychology. And positive psychology emerged around the early 2000s, and it started to try and shift the focus of the study of psychology. So previously there was a lot of focus on fixing people who were unwell. So trying to solve issues like mental illness and substance abuse, how to fix those problems to make people well again. But positive psychology wanted to build upon that and to find the things that can make people flourish in their lives. So focusing on people's strengths and how they can be built on to make people thrive rather than merely being fixed. So that's where the idea of PsyCap originated from. And other things that we've already spoken about today, like engagement, also have some origins in positive psychology. So the reason why I sort of wanted to take a moment to say why that's important is just to demonstrate that PsyCap is grounded in science. It has a good body of evidence behind it. So it's important because psychological capital has a lot of benefits that have been demonstrated in research, and we thought it was important to point that out. So just in terms of why it's called psychological capital, it has everything to do with some of the language that's used in the business world around different types of capital that are of value to organizations. So traditionally, businesses have based their worth on the economic capital that they have, the assets that they have, the money that they have at their disposal. But there's been significant shifts in the business world with the growth of things like global connectivity, knowledge, team and service-based work, and technological advances that have meant that managers have begun to realise how important other forms of capital are relating to their employees. Things like their human or intellectual capital, which is what an employee knows, and their social capital, which is who they know. Even more recently than that, with all of those changes to workplaces, in addition to just the growing complexity that we're seeing in organisations and the unprecedented amount of change that's occurred, it's been more recently recognised that in addition to what an employee knows and who they know, it's also valuable that they know who they are and that they have the capacity to build upon things like their resilience and their optimism in the workplace, so that they're able to be adaptable to the constant changes that are happening in the work environment. And we just included a little quote from Bill Gates that just really emphasized how important human capital is, social capital and psychological capital. So Bill Gates said that the inventory, the value of my company, walks out the door every evening. Now, I wanted to just show you this slide that just emphasises how universities strive to build their capital amongst their students. So we have human capital of things like knowledge, skills, abilities and experience. And it's quite clear to see how universities contribute to the development of their students' intellectual capital. Also, increasingly, there's been very intentional efforts to build the social capital of students with things like networking opportunities, mentorships, internship programs, developing e-portfolios, and just increasing their connectivity with within their own immediate community of students, but also through social media like LinkedIn. So very clear how universities are building on students' human and social capital to increase their employability. Also, indirectly, through the process of learning, students' psychological capital is also being built. So very indirectly, as students engage in different learning activities, they are building and developing their hope, their optimism, their efficacy, and their resilience as a natural part of the process. There's a lot of research that shows that psychological capital is very valuable for important outcomes that relate to the university, students, and also organisations. So that's a big tick. Yes, we know it's beneficial. We are already doing it indirectly anyway. We are already building student psychological capital through the different learning activities that we engage the students with. So what if we could just be a little bit more intentional about the way we build opportunities to build psychological capital within the learning activities that we offer at university? That will likely lead to even greater benefits. And one of the purposes of our presentation is that call to action. Let's just be a little bit more intentional about the way we develop students' psychological capital, seeing as we're already doing it indirectly anyway. So the next thing that we are going to do is just explain clearly what the 4 different aspects or components of psychological capital are, just in a little bit more detail with some examples so that you can see exactly what we're talking about. So the first one is hope. And hope is about having the willpower or the determination to set goals and objectives, as well as the way power to develop multiple pathways to achieving the goals. So in the picture on the screen, you should see a mountain, and this is one way just to think concretely about what hope is. The objective might be to reach the top of the mountain. So that's the willpower, the objective. The way power is looking for multiple pathways. So before we start climbing the mountain, we'd probably consider the different pathways we could take to reach the top of the mountain. The reason why it's important to create multiple pathways to goals is because if you meet obstacles along the way, then you need to be able to switch pathways effectively and adaptively in order to reach your goal. So the way that we encourage each other to develop hope is to really encourage setting goals that are challenging but achievable, breaking goals down into smaller chunks or smaller sub-goals, and developing multiple pathways to achieving goals. So that's hope. The next part of psychological capital is efficacy, and you can think about that as confidence. So that's having the confidence to put in effort that you need to achieve goals and also to undertake challenging tasks. So it's also about believing that you have the ability to produce positive outcomes in the work that you do. So there's a couple of different ways to build your confidence, and it could be through direct experience with learning activities, so hands-on activities. It can be through vicarious experience, so watching other people succeed. It can be through encouraging one another and also role modeling enthusiasm for the tasks that you are undertaking with amongst your colleagues or from an educator to a student. The most important way to actually build confidence, though, is through direct experience, through, for example, hands-on activities or experiential learning. So in a course, for example, you could think about having an assessment piece that has multiple milestones that can be broken down, that people can achieve small parts along the way to completing the full assessment, or having some repetition in the form of the assessment. So you might have, for example, a reflective essay or a project that has some similarities to the next project so that people have an opportunity to practice their skills and develop their confidence. The next component of psychological capital is resilience. And that's basically the capacity to bounce back from any kind of adversity, conflict, or failure, or even from positive events and opportunities where you get to have a practice at increasing your responsibilities. So it's learning from past mistakes, but also from things that might have gone well. So that's what resilience is all about. And then finally, we have optimism. So there's a couple of different components of optimism. Optimism can be just generally a global outlook that you have towards life. People who tend to be more optimistic tend to believe that they will have good outcomes in life, and that if they put effort into something, it will result in a good outcome. Optimism also relates to our attributional styles. And what I mean by that is how we explain the causes of positive and negative events. So optimists tend to attribute positive events to causes that are permanent, personal or internal, and pervasive, while pessimists tend to do exactly the opposite. So if you think of an example of sitting for an exam. Now, if an optimist gets a great mark on an exam, they're more likely to attribute it to their own hard work or their natural ability to learn, which are all internal causes that are permanent. People who are a little bit more pessimistic are more likely to say that they got a good mark on the exam because they just got lucky, or the exam was too easy, and they're unlikely to be successful in the next exam. So very temporary and external causes. So some of the ways that you could build optimism are through challenging negative self-talk and also challenging self-defeating beliefs. So next in our presentation, we have a reflection activity, and you might need to use your chat function to respond. So just think about this. If a student receives a high mark for their assessment and approaches their lecturer for feedback about what they did well, what aspect of psychological capital are they trying to develop? So they got a good mark for their assessment. They want feedback from their lecturer. What aspect of PsyCap do you think they're trying to develop?
Feel free to use the chat and just write down what you think. Do you think this is building on hope, on self-efficacy, on optimism, resilience?
Resilience. We've got a response for resilience. Optimism. Great. Another resilience. So we've got 2 votes for resilience, 1 for optimism. Any other ideas? So just to remind you, there's hope, optimism, efficacy, and resilience. Well, we've got a couple of votes for efficacy.
You're tied there.
Okay. So the answer is that everyone is correct, because the different elements of, even though there's the 4 core elements of psychological capital, they are so interconnected that when you try to do something like seeking feedback for a job that you did well, then you're actually building multiple different aspects of psychological capital. So everyone is correct. So well done, everyone, and thanks very much for participating. What we wanted to do in the next section of this presentation is just to provide a little bit of evidence that shows that there's really sound scientific research that shows the importance of building psychological capital, both within students in educational settings, but also employees in organisational settings. There's a huge amount of transferability of PsyCap skills from university to the workplace. So these 2 bodies of research are completely interrelated. On the screen now, we have some studies conducted in educational settings that have predominantly looked at the relationship between psychological capital and academic performance and have found positive relationships. So working on your own psychological capital, building your student psychological capital, has good impacts on how well they do in their courses, as well as their engagement in the courses. So good research in different countries, you can see on the slide as well. have been involved in these studies. The body of research related to educational settings is relatively new, but there's a lot of research in organisational settings. And on the screen now, we've got the results of a couple of different meta-analyses. And what they've shown is that psychological capital in the workplace is related to things like higher job satisfaction, higher organisational commitment, greater well-being, and greater performance. And it's linked to less negative attitudes and behaviours like cynicism for change, stress and anxiety, and turnover. So they're all work outcomes, but you can also definitely see how they could relate to university as well. So satisfaction with your courses, commitment to your courses, and how much stress and anxiety you feel towards your assessment, and also turnover intentions, so retention at university. So you can see the link between the organisational outcomes and the university outcomes. The final bit of evidence that we have relates to PsyCap being contagious in the best possible way. So what we mean by that is that if you, in an organisational setting, if you can give psychological capital training to leaders, then there's a flow-on effect to their followers. And you can put that into a university context too. Educators also working on building their own psychological capital are likely to increase the psychological capital of their students. So one of the points of this presentation is to also say that building psychological capital is not just for students, it's also for staff as well. Everyone benefits from flow-on effects of psychological capital. There's also good evidence to show that psychological capital can be trained. It's not just something that is built within a person that they're born with that can't be changed, and that's important. It can be developed to improve performance. So just in summary, to remind you, there's 4 components of PsyCap, which are hope, efficacy, resilience, and optimism. There's a lot of beneficial outcomes that can be trained, and that intentionally building psychological capital into our university education, for example, through experiential learning, is likely to further enhance our students' learning and employability outcomes.
Okay, so our next approach, after Amanda has very well explained everything about psychological capital, is to try to connect these concepts into an engineering course, right? So Amanda mentioned before about the benefits in hands-on and practical activities. So that's why we decided to include an experiential learning-based engineering course for this purpose, trying to build psychological capital into an experiential learning course. First of all, I'm going to give you a little background of why experiential learning, discuss a bit of the strategies that we have in this course, which is a 4th-year engineering course, and how we're applying, how we can build, and at the end, a psychological capital on it. So why experiential learning? We have probably since 2016 started redesigning most of our 4th-year courses to make them not all experiential learning, but to have a different pedagogical strategy or pedagogical approach. Experiential learning has proven to be quite effective. The idea is to try to build certain skills, or mostly practical skills, within students so they can be more employable. As you can see here, or you can think of, employers often require engineering graduates with not only technical knowledge, which sometimes happens, but also a good set of hands-on and practical skills. Yeah, these skills may be developed by designing activities that provide students with, as it says here, self-driven experiential learning opportunities. So that has been our approach for a few years, but in the past, or for the past 3 years, we started looking at the benefits of this. We started redesigning our 1st-year courses by experiential learning approaches, with the idea of increasing student skills, increasing student engagement. We want students to start becoming a bit more prepared for the rest of the degree, not only with the theory, but also with the practice. And it has been noted by academics from 2nd, 3rd year, where students come a bit more prepared. They already know how to use a sophisticated oscilloscope or a bench multimeter. So using these things have proven to be quite effective. So, and at the same time, it increases the student engagement into our courses, enhance their learning outcomes, and of course, improves knowledge retention. So In a basic idea, just to give you a background in case you haven't heard about it, experiential learning is defined as the process whereby knowledge is created through the transformation of experience. This was introduced as an experiential learning cycle by Kolb in 1984, although the concept has been there for a long time, since Dewey in the 30s or 40s. But in other words, what we mean with experiential learning cycle or experiential learning as such is basically the process of learning by doing. In simple terms, is learning by doing. So by making students understand this idea is what we actually have a better approach in our courses. As you can see there, it's a clockwise cycle that starts in stage 1 as concrete experience, moves into a reflective observation, abstract conceptualization stage 3, and then active experimentation to go back to stage 1. According to Kolb, it doesn't matter if the learner enters in stage 1 or stage 4, or it doesn't matter where the learner enters, as long as the learner completes one full cycle. That means it has achieved the whole experiential learning cycle, right? For our purpose, the purpose I'm going to talk about, we actually decided to ask the students to start in stage 1, where everything just, or the course just starts, because it was easier for us to assess it and to guide it as instructors. Yep. But it's important to keep in mind that this is quite open as long as it completes one full cycle. I'm going to talk about these stages briefly once we approach them into our courses, you will see. So how does it work? We grabbed one course as a case study, Advanced Communication Systems. This is a 4-year course in the Bachelor of Electronic Engineering at Griffith. It's split into several modules that include microwave circuits, satellite communications, mobile wireless communications, radar, smart antennas, and every year we modified a little bit the program because we have the pleasure to receive guest speakers or to have presenters from industry. So it's a quite changeable that adapts to the current trends in terms of these sort of technologies which improve all the time. So it's an important and interesting approach what we do. That's the theoretical parts, that's the teaching. This course is offered in a 12-week period that we call trimesters, and it's offered once a year. Now, the important thing is the assessment. We have a final examination, which is mostly theoretical with short questions, short answers, problem solving, but we have a 40%, which is split into 2 assignments, assignment 1 and assignment 2. From now on, I'm going to talk about them, which is what refers to as the experiential learning. Okay. We provide students about 5 to 6 weeks for completion, where they have to conceive. First of all, they have to select a project, conceive, design, implement, test it, and report outcomes of it. How do they report it? Well, through an individual report. Although they can work in teams, we encourage them to work in pairs. They have to provide an individual report because we want to assess what was the individual contribution of the students towards the project. And of course, if it's a master's students, we ask them to put this report in an IEEE format template, so they start becoming aware of the idea of writing a research contribution as by means of a paper. For undergrad students, we have a different template, which is probably easier to follow. Of course, if the undergrad students want to use the master's template, it's all welcome. Everything that proves that student wants to do a bit more than what is assigned to, it's always a benefit for them and for us. So going back to the cycle, if you look at the stages, we have modified them to make them related to our course. We have in the first stage where the student actually selects a project through a 3-line description. I'm going to talk a little bit about this. They select a project in consultation with the teaching staff, with instructors, and this is where actually we clearly see their development in terms of that psychological capital that Amanda has been talking about, and I'll talk about this in a second. Once the student has received the project or selected project, they design the project protocol. They start working on basic calculations, simulations based on fundamental theory that was provided during the lecture. From there, they actually moved into the second stage where the experiment is actually conducted and results are gathered. At this point, things like project management, group work, and student-to-student interaction become very important for a meaningful reflection, which is what student has to go through. So questions like what worked, what didn't work arise. They become a crucial part of this stage. From there, the student moves into the stage 3, where they actually draw conclusions from the experience with the support from the teaching staff, feedback from peers and instructors. All this is very relevant before going into the stage 4, where they actually have to create a new and improved strategies for the design and development of the second assignment. So that's why we have 2 assignments. It's a crucial part of the experiential learning approach, where we let the student go through the whole cycle with 1 assignment, and then we bring them back and make them start again with the second assignment. But of course, the student has a completely different mindset. It comes to the second assignment much better prepared, as you will see in the outcomes. How does that work? Well, we have a pool of questions, a pool of projects. There are 1 to 3 line description, very obscure with an obscure application or industry application, but it's there, and we want the students to find that out. These are examples just of 7. It's not really random as the image, as the Lotto image. We actually let the students to decide what project they want to choose out of 40. Remember, they work in teams of 2. And once the student chooses a project, that project locks in and nobody can choose it. Not for assignment 1, not for assignment 2. The important thing of this is that the level of difficulty for all assignments is mostly the same. We don't want to make assignment 2 more difficult, because then it's difficult to assess what has been the student improvement towards this experiential learning cycle. So we want all the projects to have a similar level of difficulty. So for example, and I don't want to get into that much detail because it's not really the scope of the presentation, but a student, for example, chooses problem 2, effects of a C slot on a microstrip patch antenna bandwidth. Well, what do? They actually have to go through the whole problem design, from understanding the problem, understanding the theory, and actually designing using CAD software. Yeah, there are several software to do microstrip design. The idea of this project is, okay, we are going to do a patch, a microstrip patch, and measure the reflection coefficient, the S parameters. Then we're going to introduce a C slot just to see what's going to be the effect in terms of the resonant frequency. So that's what the student does. They go through the whole design, as I mentioned before, but also the fabrication. So we have fabrication facilities in our labs where they can actually do that. The student does the theoretical analysis and design. As you can see here, the student introduced a quarter wave transformer just to match the characteristic impedance from the antenna, which is around 200 ohms, into a transmission line, which is 50 ohms. Well, basically, they do the whole design and manufacture, and of course analysis. So they need to learn how to use the vector network analyzer to determine these parameters, from there to calculate or determine the bandwidth and central frequency. So all these things that you are probably aware of, this is what the student has to go through. But then after that, the student writes the report, submits, and then goes back to stage 1, right? In stage 1, it means they have to select another project. This is for assignment 2. And the interesting thing is that all projects can be quite different between them, which is good, because then we try to explore these abilities or interests from the student. And this is some of the things that we have received in our feedback. So in this case, the same student, same team, they decided to work now with very low frequency systems. They haven't done any design here. Mostly they have used a device that we designed in Griffith long time ago, which is called TSIM, and is basically a receiver that gets a signal from Northwest Cape, which is in Western Australia. It's a 19.8 kilohertz. And the idea is to try to determine subsurface impedance variations of the Earth, so we can find anomalies in terms of different types of materials, right? So it becomes a bit more of an electromagnetics, but also geological problem, which is quite interesting. So the student needs to determine this theoretically. They have to calculate the electric and magnetic field, so they can then determine the surface impedance. Therefore, they can determine the apparent resistivity, and from there, the conductivity. So they can give them all these parameters that allow them to explore what's actually happening underground without really doing any drilling or anything. So in this case, the student used a battery-powered low-frequency oscillator that was driving a wire, as you can see in red there, and then compared to the baseline, which is the readings from that antenna in Western Australia. So that Northwest Cape, I can always give you more information about it. It's very interesting. There's a huge array of monopole antennas in the area. It used to be a military base, and it used to be used for radar navigation, and now it's just a signal that's still used for radar navigation, but not that much, because of course everybody has GPS, but it's a free signal and 19.8. So we have a receiver that helps us to build some interesting approaches that we use in the mining industry. So we use this machine a lot in the mining industry, and we like to put students to work in these projects that are actually quite real. Yeah, sometimes they have the chance to meet the industrial partners, so it's a good opportunity. So anyway, that's not the main point. The main point is that when the student submits the second report, they go back and they have to complete this little survey. Did you find the assessment process easy to follow? Did you apply the learn process from the first assignment towards the second assignment? Very important, point 3, what outcomes did you obtain in assignment 1 that influenced the approach that you undertook in the cycle process of assignment 2, right? It doesn't matter if we make them aware of what experiential learning is. They go through the whole process with us. We go, but not really supervising them. We're not really doing a session stage work here. We're trying to move away from that traditional way of teaching the student by letting them reflect and find everything on their own. So in the last question, what was the role of the instructor, or how did you perceive the instructor's role in your achievements in the 2 assignments? So let me read for you something that one of the team said. Instructors acted as additional group mates. They were involved in discussions and provided support and feedback, allowing for the discussions of ideas which were invaluable to the project. So that's the way we want students to perceive us. We want to function more as a mentor or coach that will encourage critical reflection on students and provide ongoing feedback, right? So that's why they start with a very obscure 3-line project. They become scared, but at the end, they manage to do it very well. So in terms of feedback, this is the official feedback that we have at our university with these 5 official questions. As you can see, it's quite good evaluated, but for us, it's always the informal or qualitative feedback most important. And you can see some of the excerpts on the bottom. The first one, for example, it says the first assignment allowed me for reflection and more preparedness. Very important. Student feels more prepared before the second assignment. This is what we want to achieve. And these are some of the things that we are seeing when we are trying to build psychological capital in this context. Learning outcomes. Well, clearly to say that students perform much better in the second project. This is an 87 out of 100 compared to a 65 out of 100. This actually supports the efficacy of the 4th stage of the learning cycle, where the students have already tested the research hypothesis and they build into the next experience. So we think that experiential learning is a good way to encourage, motivate, and get good outcomes from students' performance. But one of the things, and this is the importance of this talk, is to showcase that actually indirectly and unintentionally, all the psychological capital has been actually embedded into the progress along these projects. And it doesn't matter, it doesn't really need to be experiential learning, it can be any other pedagogical approach or technique, but it's clear that these 4 components are clearly embedded in the progress of the students throughout their course, right? So for example, I'm gonna try to give some examples. You may have picked on some others, but I'm going to try to pick some of the things that we observed in the psychological capital here throughout the student progress in the projects. When we talk about hope, is when the students basically set their objectives for the assignments. They design, as Amanda mentioned with the mountain, very interesting example, they design different pathways to achieve those goals that they're setting once they understand what the project's about, right? But to do that, they need to be confident in their selection process. This is where efficacy comes into play. They go select a project, and it's very interesting to see what happens. In the first assignment, the student chooses the project based on what they think they're going to be more comfortable with. They look at the 3-line description, they think they have those skills to achieve that particular project, and they choose it. Not really thinking about anything else. It's just what makes them feel more comfortable. But what we have seen is that many of the teams for assignment 2, they come to us and say, look, can I have a project that is more challenging than what they do, considering that all the projects have the same level of difficulty? So the students have built that confidence that will allow them to prepare them better for the second assignment. This clearly falls into the efficacy component of psychological capital. One of the things that we have observed is that not all students go straight into picking one project. Some of them actually struggle. Some students struggle to choose a project because they don't understand the line at all and they feel scared. So we as instructors, we try to encourage them. We try to extract from them by asking them, what do you like? What are your interests? How did you do in these particular courses in the previous years of the degree? We try to find out what actually are the skills that they have and they don't really know. So we encourage them. We also excite them. We said, look, if you like these projects, just be aware that this project is actually quite used in industry. We have partners that they may speak to you and give you some advice. You can do field testing. So we try to develop that excitement in them that actually continues building in that confidence as part of the efficacy. Of course, resilience, this is clear. Students perform not satisfactorily well, then they have to overcome those issues, become resilient, so they can go into the assessment tool with a different mindset and a different motivation. But not only they have to struggle. If they perform well, as Amanda mentioned, the idea is that they can use that to learn for growth as a growth opportunity, which is very important. So they use that first assignment that was satisfactory to get into the second assignment with the same and more improved mindset. And at the end, optimism. This is quite interesting because the idea is to show, what did you do well? We try to strike this from the student. What did you do well in assignment 1 that will take you into assignment 2 with the same or better performance? Some students don't like to work in teamwork. Maybe some of you relate to this. Mm-hmm. The idea is, well, what about you tell us what skills do you have that you can bring to the team? Some students are afraid of letting the team down. So we try to take that from them. What skills do you have that you can contribute to the team? Some other students, they don't like to work in teamwork because they actually don't like the other partner to let them down. So instead of becoming or building something negative on this, we try students to tell them that by being part of our teamwork, they can actually build a leadership skill so they can guide everybody else in the team if that's the case, which sometimes not. So that it's implicit, right? One of the things that we want, and I will finish very soon, is psychological capital has worked indirectly, unintentionally in an experiential learning course. We have demonstrated this. If this is true, if this works, what about we make this or why not implementing this in the course structure for better outcomes and academic performance? I think it's possible. I think if we make the students, or if we suggest making students being aware of it, probably their performance will be even greater than the one we have, which is unintentional. So we have a call to action for that purpose. So what we want is actually to probably suggest a combination of psychological capital, in this case with an experiential learning cycle. We have a cycle that contributes to the centralized idea, which is psychological capital, and at the same time, the centralized idea that influences the performance of each of the stages of the cycle or the experiential learning cycle. So we have these 4 legs that actually comprise the psychological capital, can be used in any of the stages of the experiential learning. And as I said before, it doesn't need to be used only in experiential learning, can be used in any pedagogical strategy. So we think it's possible to make it intentional and produce better outcomes and academic performance from students and also instructors. How are we going to do that? How are we going to build this?
So we've put together a few ideas for how to implement psychological capital in your courses. So there are lots of different things that you could do, and you can be very creative with this, but just some specific ideas. This is for students to take responsibility for building their own psychological capital, but also how can we intentionally maybe slightly shift around our assessment so that we can help students build psychological capital. So some examples would include really promoting goal setting, setting objectives at the beginning of assessment or activities, and encouraging students to look for multiple pathways so they can overcome any potential obstacles, incorporating some of those experiential hands-on activities to build psychological capital through direct experience, because they're one of the most effective ways to build confidence, for example, is through direct experience. So having activities that are challenging but achievable. So psychological capital develops more effectively when it's based on successful learning of challenging tasks. It has a longer impact than success of easy tasks. Also, trying to build opportunities to reflect and learn from both a student's strengths and also their opportunities for development. Encouraging one another, whether you're a student working in a team or whether you're an educator teaching students, encourage one another and role model enthusiasm for the tasks. And the final point that we have is that the teamwork, the importance of teamwork in courses. Psychological capital is contagious. It flows from person to person. And also teamwork builds leadership, self-awareness, and promotes opportunities for feedback, which are all helpful in building psychological capital. So that was the end of our talk. Thank you so much for your attention. And please, if you have any questions, let us know. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Amanda. And thank you very much for your attention.
Participants, do you have any queries?
I think we echo what Selvan said before. These are topics that lead to reflection, and we are also happy to give you our contact details so anybody can contact us and ask any questions that you may have later on when you feel that you want to do it.
Sure. So thank you, Dr. Amanda and Dr. Hugo, for the interesting talk. I am sure participants will unlock their hero potential, and it is really an interesting talk that we need to think about incorporating the PsyCap to our course structure. Thank you very much.
Our pleasure.